Thanks, Fiona. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Gannon of Orbis Lab Systems. We partner with Thermo Fisher Scientific in the area of informatics. So this stream in the seminar is on quality, and Thermo Fisher Scientific is a major scientific solution supplier, and amongst its solutions, apart from instrumentation, which you're probably aware of, are information management systems for the laboratory. So I just want to touch on a couple of points today at a high level where informatics, as it's known, or information systems for the laboratory, help in the global food quality supply chain. I mean, we all know the importance of exports to Ireland and also imports to Ireland in making various products. And it's increasingly clear that the level of product we sell and manufacture require testing in the manufacturing facility. So I don't know how many of you here work in manufacturing or whether you have laboratories, but if you have laboratories, you're familiar with the various chemical and micro testing that's done. And still a lot of this is recorded on paper, but increasingly in food, but in other industries as well, pharmaceuticals, it's going completely electronic. But if it is, the compliance standards that we have to work to are increasing all the time. So I'll be touching on some of those. On the left pane there, these are the key areas an information system in the laboratory provides. So basically, recording your test results, whether it's done manually entered or captured from an instrument. Also, recording raw data. So historically, companies are now able to archive all the raw instrument data. Big area for that will be pesticide testing, for example, here. Having vast amounts of data that comes off the GCM SMS archived and being able to look over the history of that data for a number of years to detect trends in the data or identify particular features that you need to look for in your testing. And then the last is laboratory execution, where increasingly labs are being asked to automate their processes, the SOPs, or the quality standards that they work to, so that you have them online on a tablet PC and you can assure an auditor that you've worked to those standards. But the strength of any solution like this is in its integration. It's got to be able to integrate into the business supply chain, so when raw materials come in, you can test them and you can trace them. And also when you export as well, that you're able to produce a certificate analysis to go with the consignment. So I just want to touch on a couple of points on regulatory compliance for food. The three tracks we look at are firstly traceability, and you're all familiar with that. Then there's testing for authenticity and adulteration. We work with one of the leading soft drink manufacturers in the world, and they would run particular product integrity programs using a laboratory information management system as the source of the data for that. And then there's the risk-based approach, which is HACCP, and there you're looking at perhaps environmental monitoring for nutritional products, where you're running programs for clean swabbing plants and trying to isolate bacteria. So typically, what does a LIMS give you? And LIMS is the acronym for Laboratory Information Management System. The raw data, as I said, for microchemistry testing is recorded or captured from an instrument. It provides the whole chain of custody on the sample from the point at which it's taken in production to when a quality supervisor signs it off. And so you can show a customer, if you're making for a particular customer to a high spec, that you can trace every result, or you can show it to an auditor if you're working to a certain level of compliance and quoting that compliance with your product. As far as other areas that it works with, you've got specification control, so you can grade a product to the specs for particular markets. So if you're producing, for example, we would work with some of the food multiples here, like Kerry or Ingredients. They're producing powder for a foreign market. You grade it, you've got one set of specs you've got to be within for one market and a different set for another market. Again, that can be done at the end of the quality process in the lab by a supervisor, by a quality person, can run that grading program. The last point there is on the HACCP, not AACP, HACCP. And one of the areas we work a lot with is environmental monitoring, for example, nutritional products, baby foods, where the plants are sterile and they run particular programs so that every point or likely point of contamination is tested both on a routine basis and on a risk basis. Now, if you do that on paper or on Excel spreadsheets, it's very complex. It's a lot of data. You're working very hard to generate that data. You also get very poor payback from that data, because if you put it on paper or put it into Excel, you're not going to get a lot of intelligence from the data. But if you put it into a database, you will, because you'll be able to correlate the data and use it for data intelligence. And you can learn something about some of the patterns of microorganisms that are happening in your manufacturing. So that's another strength of an information-based system for the lab in those programs. Coming back to the integration side again, I'll just give you two practical examples of where this type of integration. For example, in food, if you receive a ingredient from a supplier and you're making something with that ingredient, you can, as it's received into the warehouse, a sample will be taken. The laboratory information system can create that sample and you can enter your results against it. You can compare that against your supplier's cert of analysis and see is it in pass or fail. That does two things. One is you can decide to let it into the supply chain, so it's a decision support. But also, if your supplier is contracted to produce to a certain level for you, you're measuring that supplier's performance. A second example is we work a lot with the Department of Agriculture here in Ireland on the primary food side, and their laboratories are centralised on our system, but as you're probably aware, they have some, to keep the level, the quality of meat that we export here in Ireland, they have very advanced systems for animal tracking. So basically every time they get a sample from a farm here and they test it for a disease, they enter the results of that test onto one of these laboratory systems, but the animal history is already on their animal health tracking system. So not alone does it have the history of the animal's movements, but any tests or tests for that herd or tests for that farmer or tests in that area can be tracked. And that gives a huge amount of information if there's an outbreak of any particular disease. That's one of the reasons why they invest so heavily in these systems, because they're able to show potential markets, the level of testing we do here with our meat and with our food produce. On traceability, this is just a very simple example from the system, and it's a brewing example. So we're looking at a batch in brewing. We've got yeast. We've got some testing for microorganisms in manufacturing. We've got the barley. And the idea is, if you've got that information, the lot information and the quality information, you can drill down into the system and see the results with that. Okay? So the overall integration gives you a full quality picture, not just on the finished product results, but in all the ingredients that have gone into making the product. So to conclude with, the three levels to food quality that a laboratory information management system addresses are your laboratory results, integration to the plant where you can do near or online testing, or integration into the supply chain where you can test finished products or raw materials that you receive. And also there are the various risk-based programs for environmental monitoring. Okay. Any questions?